Just say no. Just say no. Seriously. I mean, we say yes and no to things all day long. Many things all day long we say yes and no to. And the problem with us and why we're not being successful is that we're saying yes and no to the wrong things. We're not saying yes and no to the right things. Yesterday on our quadrant list, we had a list of a bunch of different tasks that fit into each of these different areas. I challenge you to fit your tasks into this quadrant. Are they urgent and important? Urgent and not important? Not urgent but important? Or not urgent and not important? Where do your tasks fit into this calendar? How can you get that fixed? We're all trying to move into quadrant 2, where we are doing not urgent tasks, but they are important. So we're not reacting, we're proactively approaching our calendar. That's where I've lived for years. I ran training centers, and running those training centers, I got very used to making an amazing checklist with a customer-focused journey and teaching new managers what the perfect day and the perfect shifts look like and how to prep the next shift up for success and the next day for success and the next week for success and how to plan a month so that way you were crushing your goals. I live by my calendar. And in fact, so much so that if something's on my calendar, it literally doesn't exist. My wife has to send me calendar appointments for things that are going on in our lives, or it doesn't exist. I mean, that could be a flaw in some ways, right? Like I'm a little less flexible to things that can happen. They will frustrate me if somebody cancels on an appointment and now I have a hole. That's a little frustrating to me because I could have had another appointment in that time slot. I mean, I'm sure I can find something to work on, and that's not really the point. The point is, how can we move our lives into that quadrant 2? I had a boss at one point who was the exact opposite of me. This boss loved to plan on the fly, and I was a plan in advance. I can make a calendar appointment and say repeat for the next year, and a year from now I'm still okay with that. And this boss was much more about events, and all of their calendar worked around the events that were scheduled into it. And so my weekly one-on-one was often getting missed. Weekly and daily follow-ups on just day-to-day business, a variety of different aspects were getting mixed. And then the boss would come back into town and say, okay, let's meet. Well, wait a minute, no, I've got a networking event. I got other appointments scheduled. I've got a class that I'm teaching. I've got these other things going on. And then that boss would get frustrated because I wasn't dropping everything for this urgent and important task that is now at hand. Instead of forward thinking and preparing, knowing what events were coming up and asking for a shift several weeks in advance to make sure that that appointment, which is important, is a not urgent change, to plan in advance. And that's the big shift. Like, we want to live in 2. In fact, we want to live in 2 so much that the other areas all get minimized. And it's not going to happen right away because we have so many people in our lives that are used to bringing us urgent things that are important. And until we have a process in place to make sure that those urgent things are done in advance and are no longer urgent, we're going to run into those difficulties. We're going to have those problems. The essence of time and life management really comes down to one of 3 things. So look at these 3 and see which one you are. You ready? Do you have the inability to prioritize? Do you have the inability or desire to organize around those priorities? Or do you have the lack of discipline to execute the priorities? So one more time. Do you have the inability to prioritize? Do you have the inability or desire to organize around those priorities? Or do you have the lack of discipline to execute those priorities. I think most of us looking at it wouldn't like to admit that we have the inability to prioritize. Like, I think we can look at our task list and determine what the most important items on that list are. It's probably not number one for most of us. Looking at number two, the inability or desire to organize. Well, again, inability to organize. I think I can plan out my calendar. Maybe. Some of us aren't very skilled at how to make a calendar and what to make those blocks look like and what you should do with those blocks and how many hours to schedule your priorities. That's a much longer class than this video is going to be. And then, so looking at number three, the lack of discipline to execute the priorities. Most people, when I ask that question, when I'm coaching somebody and you ask that question, almost everybody picks number three because they think that, again, it's that lack of self-discipline. What have we talked about before? It's not self-discipline. It's a process, right? Because we only need enough self-discipline in order to do the task of the day. If we have a process that we have committed ourselves to and created a habit around, that part's not that part's easy. But most people end up picking number three, saying that self-discipline is the problem, that they don't have the discipline to actually do the work. And I would suggest that perhaps you just don't have the process in place to actually do the work. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest it's not a brain problem, it's not a skill problem, it could be a process problem, which is pretty easy to fix. We just have to introduce you to the right process. It's actually a heart problem. Again, going back to my boss, like maybe the story that I was telling myself is that he didn't care about me. And I know that's not the case. I know that he cared. He might not have cared about my calendar. He may not have cared about that particular space. Or maybe I didn't care enough about the meeting, inside out, to make sure that I was familiar with where his events were going to be, to make sure that our meeting still occurred on the days he was in town, on the weeks that he would be out of town. Whew, like that's deep, right? So my boss not caring about our one-on-ones is really my problem because I'm not a victim. I'm accountable for making sure these meetings happen and things are successful too, right? So if I really wanted to live in quadrant 2 in this particular scenario, then I should have forward thinking, put something onto the calendar in advance, shifting it to make sure that I did not have an urgent, important meeting fall in my lap last minute. I think a lot of it's about heart. It's about the desire to do the priorities. So either you haven't internalized the desire to have these important things happen, or speaking of our mission statement and our purpose and our priorities in life, we haven't internalized those. Like, we might have an employee that works for us or a friend or a family member that's, just kind of been on our nerves recently that we just don't want to meet with. And as a result, we don't have the desire to meet with them. And that's why the meeting's falling short, or we're dropping the ball on a few things there, maybe having a fight with a spouse and, being home on time for dinner isn't what you want to do, even though it makes it worse. Like, that could be one thing that we're going through. Or the desire could simply be that we haven't internalized those priorities and we just put them down on paper. We look at our mission statement and it's not in here yet. It's not a part of us yet. It's just on paper. So now there are 30 pages in the book that go into time management and how to prioritize your time correctly in order to grow quadrant 2 and get into that not urgent, important tasks in your life. And we're not going to go there in this video series. So if you want to know more, send me a message, buy the book. Otherwise, moving on to habit number 4 tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.